Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, would you name the regrets for this evening?
Yes, we have regrets from Councillor Adams and Councillor Demoff.
Thank you. And Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Thank you. Would two of you move and second Committee of the Whole? Councillor Johnston, Councillor Duddick, all in favor? Opposed, if any? We are now resolved into Committee of the Whole. There are no consent items. In fact, there's nothing except the two main events of the evening, the housekeeping amendment to the official plan and the recommendation report for the comprehensive zoning bylaw, our famous in-zone project. Madam Director, would you like to get us started?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of Council. It is my pleasure this evening to introduce to you two items on your agenda on behalf of the in-zone committee group that is here this evening, on behalf of John Tudor and myself and the whole team. And those relate to the official plan amendment, housekeeping amendment, and the in-zone new comprehensive bylaw itself. I would like to start off by saying that there is a idiomatic phrase that's used when you're about to finish the last part of a major project. And it's referred to as coming down the home stretch. And I would suggest to you that after 2.5 years and several laps around the track, we are now in the home stretch. In-zone is probably one of the most important projects for this council in this term, and it's one of the major projects under Vision 2057. It's also significant in the role that it plays in implementing the Livable Oakville Plan. Having a bylaw that conforms to the Livable Oakville Plan is crucial. It's also required by the province to have a comprehensive bylaw in place within 3 years of the approval of a new official plan. And I would note that, again, Oakville is one of the few municipalities within the GTA that has accomplished this and is meeting those requirements within that time frame. Most importantly, however, is the conformity of this bylaw with the Livable Oakville Plan. And why is that important? Livable Oakville was unanimously approved by this council in 2009 and by the Ontario Municipal Board in 2011. It sets the direction and the policies for growth and managing growth and change for the next 20 years. Livable Oakville was a made-in-Oakville plan for the town of Oakville. It's interesting that recently, as recent as yesterday, the province released the 2014 Provincial Policy Statement. And it's interesting that the new language in that provincial policy statement recognizes exactly what this town did, this council did in Livable Oakville, and that is approve appropriate locations for growth based on local conditions. Where Livable Oakville sets out policies to protect our natural heritage system, in-zone provides restrictive provisions and regulations to achieve those policies. Where Livable Oakville provides a framework for our economic prosperity and the protection of our employment lands, in-zone provides for appropriate uses and forms of development with clear definitions. Where Livable Oakville provides policies to direct growth and the majority of intensification to our growth areas, in-zone responds by implementing this through the provision of uses and development forms that are expected. And finally, where Livable Oakville most importantly sets clear policies for the preservation and maintenance of the character of our stable residential areas, in-zone provides for certainty, for expected development and consistency of regulations and provisions. In-zone, I would submit to you, is a made-in-Oakville bylaw for the town of Oakville. You will hear from Mr. Nethery this evening that in the last 2.5 years, the in-zone project team has followed an unprecedented process for consultation and engagement, whether it is through internal staff working groups, external agency consultation, the valuable work of this council and its members through the in-zone subcommittee, or the hundreds of meetings with stakeholders, developers, builders, business owners, and several members of the public throughout the town. The approach has been established based on principles that have been maintained throughout this process, which Mr. Nethery will speak to. The approach in zone has involved extensive research and analysis several technical papers related to specific issues, and has developed regulations using an evidence-based foundation. InZone, like many of the planning projects, has been an iterative project. It has been used to identify issues, clarify them, and in the majority of cases, resolve them through correspondence and consultation. And your agenda is clearly reflective of that, as you will see a very transparent consultation process that has taken place. And through the 3 draft versions of the bylaw, even with additional edits this evening, continued with that process. This evening, staff are recommending that Council approve Bylaw 2014-014 and the accompanying official plan amendment. You will respectfully hear from a number of individuals who do not share that position. Much of the correspondence you've received this evening is a reiteration of previous correspondence with site-specific issues. As much as the consultation process and issue resolution has been extensive, there are still issues that remain. And I would suggest to you that they are basically 2 types. One type of issue that has arisen throughout this process have been those that cannot be resolved through the in-zone process, whether they are requests to change the Ontario Building Code or requests that are seeking to change policy in livable Oakville. They cannot be addressed through this process. Issues that are related to policy and design guidelines will be addressed. These are important issues that need to be considered, and there are current processes underway with respect to the Livable by Design Urban Design Manual, as well as the town's 5-year official plan review process, which through the long-range work program was identified at the last Planning and Development Council meeting, and it will be getting underway this spring and summer. The official plan review process will provide an opportunity to consider our growth areas and transitional areas. And the commercial employment review, which is referred to in the reports this evening, is the municipal comprehensive review required to provide engagement on our employment lands to determine appropriate designations and mix of uses should there be any changes that are needed. Our current Livable by Design work is also looking at potential changes to policies to strengthen our design policies throughout the town and to address development impacts, providing for the most appropriate and high-quality design throughout the town. Where further regulations may be appropriate, they will evolve through this work. So while there are notable issues, they will be addressed through the urban design and the official plan review process that will be underway in the coming months. The second area of issues are identified in the majority of the correspondence, again, that you've received this evening, and that's being reiterated from the previous correspondence received. You will hear from many with site-specific issues where changes that have been requested have not been made in the final bylaw and are not being recommended by Council. From some, there is still unfortunately a misunderstanding on a specific interpretation of the bylaw, even after significant communication. Our recommendation as staff remains to approve the bylaw as presented. We believe, and while we recognize, similar to Livable Oakville, that there may be potential appeals, we believe this bylaw is solid and defensible. So now I take you down the home stretch, and we have 2 staff presentations, one on the official plan amendment by Leslie Gill-Woods, and the second by Joe Nethery on the in-zone bylaw itself. After which time staff will be available to answer questions of Council and then proceed to the public delegations. I thank Council for your time.
Thank you, Madam Director.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. Tonight we are seeking the adoption of an official plan amendment necessary to support the passage of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. The new zoning bylaw created through the in-zone project is required to implement the policies of your official plan, the Livable Oakville plan. Your zoning bylaw cannot be more permissive than your plan. Through our work to create the draft 2014 zoning bylaw and our ongoing use of the Livable Oakville plan, we've identified a number of areas in the plan where clarity and consistency could be improved and potential conflicts could be eliminated. A draft official plan amendment to address these issues was presented at a statutory public meeting on November 4th last year and has been available since about September 30th last year. The final draft OPA before you tonight in Bylaw 2014-013 on page 441 of tonight's agenda affects the lands within the livable Oakville plan area and must be adopted prior to the passage of the 2014 zoning bylaw. The first draft of the OPA was available for public review from September 30th last year. It was updated based on comments received and further review by staff. The final draft has been available since February 7th. The OPA is a package of important but reasonable changes necessary to support and facilitate the translation of the OP policies into regulations in the new zoning bylaw. It also includes housekeeping modifications that are technical in nature, and changes to the OPA since the first draft are described in Appendix A to the staff report, starting on page 10 of tonight's agenda. In the OPA, I wanted to highlight a few key changes. For the mixed-use areas, changes include changes to the policies to provide clearer direction and design flexibility, particularly for large sites in Bronte Village and Kerr Village. The key change affecting Palermo Village is the requirement for mixed-use development north of Pine Glen Road, which is intended to ensure the development of an active main street through the historic core south of Dundas Street. Key employment changes include changes to allow for motor vehicle-related uses in certain locations. This implements the automobile-related uses review that was presented to the in-zone council subcommittee. Changes that also allow for offices and major offices within 500 meters of the Bronte GO station. In the business employment designation, there's changes that allow existing service commercial uses limited to restaurants, financial institutions, and drive-through facilities. The policies in the OPA now also allow for new service commercial uses limited to restaurants, financial institutions, and drive-through facilities when on the same lot as certain traditional employment uses within the business employment designation. Other changes in the OPA are intended to improve consistency of terminology. An example of this would be the change from automobile-related uses to motor vehicle uses, or the consistent use of the term multiple attached dwellings instead of various different terms, including townhouses, stacked townhouses, or back-to-back townhouses. They are all now just in the OP referred to as multiple attached dwellings. Other changes include corrections to mapping errors, aligning land use designation boundaries with property boundaries, and in some cases recognizing existing development. As Dana highlighted at the outset, this is not the time for bold moves. The changes proposed in this OPA are primarily intended to clarify the intent of the Livable Oakville Plan for the purpose of translating the policies into implementing zoning bylaw provisions. The upcoming official plan 5-year review exercise, including the commercial employment review, will provide direction for any major policy changes that may be appropriate. Oops. So tonight we're recommending the passage of Bylaw 2014-013 to adopt official plan number 4 to the Livable Oakville Plan. And so concludes the opening act, and I will provide more information to you after tonight's headliner, Mr. Joe Nethery.
Oh, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure. So good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I have the distinct privilege of being able to present to you tonight an updated final draft numbered version 3.1 plus some technical changes through a final memorandum released today to you this evening. My presentation, trying not to be too duplicative from what you've already heard tonight, will run through back to the outset of this project and the in-zone project principles that we established up front. I will run through the consultation process that we have undertaken over the past 2.5 years. Ms. Anderson has outlined a number of themes raised since November over the course of this project. I have some additional information and analysis to share on those, and then outline the process going forward from today. So, per usual with my presentations, it always goes back to October of 2011 when the project terms of reference were received by this council. They established 8 secondary project principles. And my key message to you tonight is that we have achieved these principles. We were asked to look at design considerations. You see that manifested in minimum and maximum yard requirements being introduced in a number of key locations. We see a new consistent regulation across all zones in the town as it relates to matters such as height above rooftops, with respect to locating buildings on certain corner lots. Part of accommodating new and improved design also means that development needs to be sensitive to the context that it is within. And we've achieved that in this bylaw by looking at a number of, in particular, RO zone, proposed to be called the -O suffix zone, and new regulations in there tightening up the definition of what constitutes floor area in a house, establishing a new minimum yard in all of these locations, reviewing the lot coverage that exists within these areas, and providing an evidence-based suggestion as to what an appropriate coverage figure is going forward. We've taken council's, given the limited framework that zoning is allowed to operate within, we've done I believe this bylaw does a great job of addressing environmental concerns and trying to minimize our impact. We have a new landscaping definition that increases the amount of vegetative, non-paved surfaces required to be located in these areas. The requirements for landscaping are standardized town-wide, both in zones and in applicable edge or transitional contexts, such as between employment and commercial uses and sensitive land uses, such as our residential neighborhoods. Our natural area end zone is expanded to match and implement what's in the livable Oakville plan today. And as is always wont to do, staff love having less paperwork to carry around. I'm sure you do as well, which is why we asked for the binders back. We now have a new set of definitions, over 200 definitions. The terms are standardized throughout the bylaw, so there's no more trying to interpret what's a professional in a business office in a commercial context, or a business and a professional office in an employment context, one being defined, one not being defined. From a strict paper perspective, this bylaw, if you remove the special provisions which occupy the bulk of this binder, all of these new regulations are contained in 150 pages, and there is a lot more content and a lot more clarity with respect to new development expectations in this bylaw than what's contained in the much longer 1984-63. We have continued to recognize issue-specific and previous research that has already been done. Where an additional gap was identified in this project, staff have undertaken that additional research. And the automobile-related uses study, which Ms. Gill-Woods has cited, is the best example of that in trying to come up with a consistent policy framework in that area. We don't do anything without reviewing local trends and trying to find best practices that others use and putting that Oakville context to it. It starts with using our bylaw layout mirrored upon the North Oakville bylaw, which is quite well received, at least in that context. The current map layout was generally well received, and we've maintained that sort of framework and removed a lot of the extra symbols that are within that and have moved it into more appropriate locations, such as in text, to make this easier to read. Using the standardized language, undertaking our evidence-based approach helps support that additional review in order to provide the defensible document that council expects to receive. We've done our best to maintain existing permissions where supportable under the livable Oakville plan. There's a considerable amount of correspondence in your packages tonight speaking to some of these conflict issues that the livable Oakville plan compels us as staff to provide a recommendation to you that removes some of these permissions. We've added new special provisions where needed, where a technical matter has arisen. You'll see 6 of those in particular within your technical memorandum tonight. And lastly, we have done our best as staff to fend off site-specific requests. there are a few letters in particular have come in as of today asking for rezonings as of right to go from one category into another, different on staff's recommendation. The reason that we have application processes is to undertake the detailed analysis and review that is associated with changing the permissions associated on properties. Those are the processes for considering these applications, and that is why staff haven't made these recommendations. It's also not to say we're evil and stone-faced and haven't been responsive. There are technical issues that have arisen through consultation. And through our 50-plus landowner meetings, we've reviewed a number of those with the various stakeholders. And there are recommendations both in the proper version 3.1 in front of you and in the technical memorandum that recognizes the result of this consultation. But most importantly, our very first principle, and that's conformity with the Livable Oakville Plan. A standard talking point that you will see in all of council's replies where things are proposed to be taken away is that a zoning bylaw cannot be more permissive than the official plan it implements. What this zoning bylaw does in terms of its uses, the regulations that are associated with it, is turning those visions, objectives, and goals that this council approved and turning those into specific rules that say what you can do with your land, how big those buildings can be, where they can be sited on the lot. This process has also uncovered a number of additional issues where there are some policy conflicts. Without reiterating Ms. Anderson and Ms. Gilwood's point, there are a number of upcoming studies where staff are able to undertake that detailed analysis, looking at existing market conditions, analyzing how much land area, floor area, building area that is out there looking to be occupied, continuing to make sure that parking ratios and use permissions remain effective and appropriate. These detailed studies allow us to go into that level of focus, and I would submit to council that this is where further work, if there's further work required, these are probably the locations to do it. As a consulting veteran of doing zoning bylaw projects, it's been a very refreshing and pleasant change to come to a municipality like Oakville, where there is a strong emphasis on consultation and making it meaningful and impactful. And it's kind of odd to walk into a banquet hall room, a banquet hall last week with 150, in this instance, realtors in the room who have come, well, for many reasons, but one of them is to find out about this project, to learn about it, to understand what staff is trying to recommend, to groan when we suggest that lot coverages are coming down in certain zones, to have to follow up with a point saying, we are implementing a policy that speaks to existing residential character. And staff's research into this suggests that the figures before you are the appropriate figures. We've now done 30 all about zoning workshops. With that realtor workshop this week, we're now over 600 individuals who have attended these workshops. We've done 3 rounds of open houses. The Planning Act minimum is 1 open house. Those 22 total sessions attracted 160 individuals, and I forgot to count at one of them because I was getting ready for the presentation that night. The in-zone subcommittee was struck in order for staff to present initial recommendations, to discuss project philosophies, present some ideas, and receive councillor feedback. Again, there not being any Planning Act requirement to do that, that is a very routine process that is struck here in Oakville when major studies are undertaken. We did 9 of those sessions with 7 of you on council. As of this past Friday, we're now up to 49 one-on-one meetings with stakeholders. We started counting in August of last year. 31 of those have happened since the statutory public meeting. When people were engaged into that process, when they asked to speak with us, staff were able to meet with the vast majority of those participants, of those interested stakeholders. I'm proud to say that we are able to accommodate a number of the issues that were resolved, but not all of them. If you've been interested as to what I've been doing for the last 48 hours with the great assistance of Ms. Morgan in the clerk's department, is consolidating all the written correspondence that has at least made it across my desk as a project manager. Your Appendix C was about 380 some odd pages in that. You have 2 additional handouts in front of you that are an additional 210 pages of individual submissions. 60 of those have come in the past 2 weeks. 25 of those came in today. We also maintain our project mailing list, which we send out emails to all the time. Council are members of that list as well, and you can see the frequency that we have been providing updates at key moments. 360 individuals there. Gives us, by staff's estimation, over 1,300 individual points of contact over the past 2 years and 9 months on this project. And having commiserated with Ms. Childs prior to coming up here right now, it sounds to me like this project actually outdrew the Livable Oakville plan. A number of themes have been raised in consultation since the statutory public meeting in November of 2013. And one of those first issues is our request to give permissions where the official plan does not allow it. If the Livable Oakville plan does not give staff the ability, does not authorize, give direction to permit the use, staff cannot provide that recommendation tonight. It would require a change to the plan. Ms. Gilwood's report contains the recommended official plan amendment. A second major theme revolves around a number of site-specific technical issues, starting with outside display and sales areas, working down to how landscaping requirements are going to be treated going forward. In a number of instances, staff are recommending that a further approval may be required. There are things that we are able to do as a corporation through the minor variance process that a zoning bylaw really can't and shouldn't do. Likewise, going back to the site-specific request for rezonings earlier, there are a number of issues that further study or review is recommended. There's a number of locations where that could be. It could be a development application. It could be the 5-year official plan review, and staff are committing to undertake those reviews going forward over the next few years. I should also point out at this point that the technical memorandum that is before you today includes changes proposed to the bylaw based on submissions that came in this morning. Staff have reviewed each of those letters. Admittedly, some of them had to go a little fast, but if technical issues were raised, even this morning, that staff thought that's a really good point, that's a really good catch, that recommendation is before you tonight. Everything is before you tonight. The future studies that we would be looking at, as mentioned by Ms. Anderson, include the Livable by Design Manual, our Urban Design Manual, which is coming before you for a statutory public meeting, I believe, in March. Nobody's shaking no at me, that's good. The Midtown Oakville study is another area where there has been some comment received. Again, staff will be back with those recommendations at a statutory public meeting quite soon. But one of the next major undertakings for this department, and particularly under Ms. Anderson and Ms. Childs' direction, would be the 5-year review of the Livable Oakville plan. Two major key components that have come out through the in-zone process and consultation would be our commercial and in particular employment lands. That specific review will give us staff the ability to look at the planned function of these areas, the intended uses, and which designations should be applying on individual properties. The study that was undertaken to support Livable Oakville was its own separate year-long process that I submit to council that is the same amount of information that's required in order to address many of the concerns that have been raised by the public on this process. We're also intending on undertaking a series of growth area check-ins, which look at our various policies associated with the growth areas, including permissions, plan function, and the growth in that sense. And lastly, as Ms. Anderson alluded to this in her opening notes, a number of the points that have been raised in submissions revolve around the continued outreach and our continued work as a Community and Development Commission in ensuring that the best information is available out there. One particular clause, not wanting to go into too much detail within my presentation, there are two particular footnotes associated in the mixed-use zones and the employment zones, which speak to uses. There's a check mark and a number. It's 2, I think, in all of the cases. And the footnote that's tied to it says that the uses are only permitted on a lot where the use legally existed on the effective date of this bylaw. We've received a number of concerns as staff as to how the principle of legal nonconformity works within this process. The staff interpretation of this clause, as reviewed by the in-zone project team, through Ms. Anderson, through our manager of zoning, Mr. Doe, and our chief building official, Mr. Tudert, through legal and Ms. Weiss, our peer reviewer, Lehman and Associates, Mr. Lehman and Ms. Luoma, have said that what The intent of this regulation is to make the use legal. If that use, subject to that footnote, exists on a particular lot on the effective date of this new bylaw, being the date that council passes it, that use remains permitted on the lot. We're effectively taking a snapshot in time as to the existing uses on the lot on that date, and if it existed on that lot and it's subject to that footnote, it's permitted. If it did not exist on the effective date of this bylaw, it is not permitted. Our further issues associated with that and trying to expand that permission is our commercial and employment lands review, underlining employment. I guess our key message, if I need to summarize this as quickly as possible, the proposed zoning bylaw that's before you tonight is clear. It's concise, 500 pages concise, and it fully implements the vision of the Livable Oakville Plan. Staff believe that this bylaw is fully defensible and that further friction points that are still out there that you will hear tonight from the public actually probably speak to policy issues or design guideline issues that staff are working through in the near term and the medium term. So going forward from today in terms of the mechanics itself, should council pass the bylaw, the first step, our first priority, I should have put these in a different order, because priority number one is getting a final clean copy of 2014-014, heretofore known as 2014-14, out on the website, out to our staff, and back to you as well, council. We also intend on incorporating that information into Explore Oakville to provide for single-click functionality for people looking for that zoning information. Wish us luck. The next step is to ensure that our notice of passing is completed. There is one error in the report. You can blame that on me because I can't do math. It will be published following Planning Act requirements in OREG 54506. It would be printed in the Oakville Beaver on Thursday, March the 6th. The report says the 5th. 20 days, not 21 days. Sorry, Ms. Weiss. This also involves circulating paper copies to various agencies and mailed a notice to those who are requesting it. And that's a pretty long list in of itself. As it applies to the, sorry, let me restart that slide. The transition clauses that are contained in section 1.8 are trying to provide recognition for existing planning approvals that exist today. There's also questions as to when this bylaw comes into effect. Without trying to be too technical, which is what the staff report does, there's two scenarios. After the completion of the notice period, if there are no appeals, the bylaw comes into effect immediately and retroactive back to February the 25th. I'm pretty confident that we're not going to get through this without appeals. So the bylaw remains sort of in abeyance in that sense until those appeals are resolved one way or another. Once they are resolved one way or another, the bylaw comes into effect retroactive back to February the 25th. It's the way that the Planning Act happens to work, it's a different quirk from how the policy mechanisms traditionally work today. The transition clauses provide for that relief for recent approvals that have been attained under the Livable Oakville Plan framework. I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session on that. These additional studies that are cited below will provide additional feedback and input into this, and staff may have to report back with amendments to zoning bylaw 2014-14 to give effect to these studies. Likewise, probably in a few more months after that, we will probably have identified a number of technical issues that may need to be fixed up, open bracket, other little errors, close bracket. This is all part of good bylaw maintenance and good practices in a municipality. If something isn't right in the bylaw, we should be able to come back and amend that and provide that process. Lots of great municipalities continue to do that. The town of Milton just approved a new zoning bylaw yesterday, and they did a terrific job of keeping their bylaw up to date over the last 11 years to respond to their various challenges. As always, we continue to respond to public input. We continue to be available to provide workshops. I know we have one residents association that is interested in a subsequent workshop still. Oh, there's the token typo in the presentation. We don't have another subcommittee meeting. That's one of the recommendations in your report. And as always, staff review and monitor issues and report back as appropriate. We have a number of implementation tasks, and one of the significant ones of that involves incorporating the various correspondence and interpretations that have been provided over the last few months into our Amanda database, our corporate database that Mr. Tutor's team always looks at when they're trying to determine zoning compliance to provide that assistance going forward. Plus, there's a big project team who's still available here to provide that assistance to staff, council, and members of the public as required. Per usual, I just get to do the presentations. We wouldn't be here tonight without the great support of a large project team. Ms. Gill-Woods, Mr. Rubik are here tonight. Mr. Tudor, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Childs, Ms. Tizard is a technical advisor. Ms. Chandra is back as well, who's here at the beginning of the project. Ms. Weiss, who's going to take a huge role going forward from here. And to whoever else I missed, it's been a great 2 years and 9 months, and thank you so much for your help. The staff recommendation, to oversimplify it, is that the Town of Oakville Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2014-014 be passed as amended in accordance with the February 25th memo that is before you tonight. And that's it. Staff are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Council, do you have questions now, or shall we hear the delegations? Councillor Khan.
Thank you very much. I just have a couple of questions. Some of them are cursory, and I'm really appreciative of the fact that the town did engage in quite in-depth consultation with our residents and all the stakeholders. Just on a cursory matter, you said that that we did some revisions, last-minute revisions, technical revisions, and I understand that the Planning Act requires that if submissions are going to be made, if people want to keep their appeal rights, they have to make written submissions before the council makes a decision. And I also understand that we cut off our deadline at noon for submissions, for obvious reasons, because we wanted to be able to organize for written submissions. What happens when we have that deadline for noon that says you have to make written submissions by this time, and then after that time we have revisions? What happens to those people's appeals rights?
Through your worship, I'm going to provide one quick clarification on the noon deadline before I defer to Ms. Weiss, who's better able to answer this question. The noon deadline that was spoken to in my emails, my auto reply to people who submitted this afternoon, was strictly to getting our first correspondence package together. A number of submissions, clerks would probably be better able to answer, but I think it's 9, were bundled up through the tremendous work of Ms. Morgan in particular, from what I understand, and are in front of you tonight as well. I should defer to Ms. Weiss for the remainder of the question.
Thank you. I have nothing further beyond that. I believe that all the materials that have come in afternoon are before you tonight.
And I appreciate that clarification, but my concern is that we've told people there's a noon deadline, and some people might have continued to present submissions, and others might not have because they were told of a noon deadline.
Councillor, could you read out the advisory that causes your concern?
Sorry? Well, I don't have that email that was sent out, but I understand that an email was sent out that noon was the deadline to make written submissions. And I don't think staff is denying that that was sent out, so I would need clarification on that. Okay.
Your interpretation of an email you haven't seen, to my ear, is different.
I have seen it. I just don't have it with me, is what I said.
Okay. Mr. Nethery has given you an alternate view of it than you've just provided. A decision on this matter is council's. Council can't make a decision unless we can get, the thing that's causing you your trouble. Perhaps Mr. Nethery can provide it. Looks like he has it. But I heard him give an innocent explanation, and I'm going to ask Mr. Nethery and staff to explain it again one more time.
Through your worship to the councillor, the basic mechanics of the way that we've been handling the correspondence on this is that it's all been forwarded to me. If it went straight to clerks and I wasn't copied, it was forwarded to me. We have been operating on this project for a couple of years, and Ms. Anderson can clarify with respect to development applications, that on the date that the council meeting is, the deadline for submissions to make it into the main correspondence package is noon that day. In the two main meetings that we've had on this project, again, with most correspondence coming through me, I've had an auto reply on my account that says, thank you for your submission, but the noon deadline for getting into this information has passed. Please come to council with 20 copies of your information prepared, or contact our clerk's department to make alternate arrangements. I am submitting with respect to tonight that Ms. Morgan in particular has gone to great lengths to make sure that this additional package, additional correspondence re item 2 recommendation report town of Oakville Conference of Zoning about project 2014-14 in zone project file number 4225 contain those submissions that came in after noon, after 12:30. The last one was Mr. Lebrecht's submission at 12:30, and then the auto reply went on. I turned off my email, checked it on occasion to forward items to clerks, and got this presentation built.
And thank you for that clarification. I don't seem to be confrontational here, but my point is that some people might be dissuaded to make submissions after receiving a notice that you can't submit any more submissions, written submissions. That's my only concern. I'm sure that you did provide us what you did receive after that deadline, but that's my only concern, and I think that that's something that should be addressed going forward. But more importantly, at the last minute, we provide some more revisions. What if the public hasn't given enough, opportunity to review those revisions to make an educated decision whether or not they want to, make submissions?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Khan, one of the things the implementation tasks, and I will figure this out with clerks after the meeting, finding the exact mechanism to make sure that these 2 additional correspondence packages are available online somehow. We will figure that out, and I can commit to emailing you for sure, and if everyone on council is interested, I'm more than happy to provide that information by an email to council. I see a couple of heads, so how about this? Once I figure out this issue with the clerks, I will advise council as to how we will make these 2 correspondence packages available to the public. Period.
You see, and that's appreciated, but that package will go out after we've already made a decision on this bylaw. So it becomes more of an information package rather than consultation.
Through Your Worship to Councillor Khan, it is council's staff have made a recommendation. It's council's decision as to what happens next. With respect to further timing to figure out what members of the public next steps are, we have a week and a half between tonight and when the notice of passing is completed by an advertisement in the Oakville Beaver. I recognize a number of the faces behind me in the room tonight who have been actively involved in this project and will be watching for it. From that point, there are 20 days whether to decide if should an appeal be filed. Tally all that up, that's about 4 weeks worth of additional timing. I think Ms. Anderson would like to tag in now.
Just to add, through your worship to Councillor Khan, the minor changes that have been made are no different than any other bylaw that this council would consider through a recommendation report that are made and provided to council at the meeting.
Thank you for that, but with respect, I don't have a problem when there are minor changes or technical changes, but some of the changes to me, and I'm a layperson when it comes to planning, seem to be more significant than technical change. If I can take you to 8.3.1 on page 9 of the memo. Over there, this seems to be that we're adding something completely different. There's a 3-foot meter height restriction. And I understand that was at 1.5 meters. I don't think that, to me, is considered to be wordsmithing or technical, but that's a significant change.
I'll defer to Ms. Anderson.
Sorry, through you, it's actually a reduction in height, and it's actually clarification on height that was requested. So it's a clarification. In terms of providing additional information, it's for clarification purposes.
It wasn't 5 meters, it's been reduced to 3 meters. Okay, thank you. You also explain, Mr. Nellery, when we were first here, when we first got the package, and we were at the planning meeting, I think we had version 2.0, is that one? And then we had 3.0 and 3.1, and then we have this, the latest amendments that came out today. What has changed in, if you can simplify this for me in layman's terms, what has changed with respect to the transitional provisions over the course of these different revisions?
Through your worship, if I can just clarify, because I know transition is used a couple of different ways around the council. Transition being section 1.8 and the recent approvals and applications. Okay, through your worship, back to Councillor Khan, the precise detail is provided within our staff report. There's about a page of content there. The only there is a significant amount of reorganization and rewording of certain clauses to what, in staff's opinion, better clarifies the intent of these applications. But the intent remains, the overall intent remains the same as it was in version 2.0 from November to what's before you tonight. That recent approvals, the being site plans, minor variances, and consents, are transitioned provided that they had an approval on or before the effective date of this bylaw. Applications in process continue to not be recommended to be transitioned.
I actually like the way that we've changed the transitional period, so I just wanted a clarification on that. If I can take you to building permit applications at 1.8.1.
I'm there, Your Worship.
So I'm just going to paraphrase here. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I'm telling you what my understanding is, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on this. To me, it suggests that the old bylaw applies if a building permit was filed prior to the effective date, which is either today or if there's an appeal process, whatever retroactive that date is set. Is that correct? And
Yes.
It complies with the old zoning bylaw?
Through Your Worship, yes. It would have, in order for the in order for section 1.8.1 to apply, it is staff's intent that the building permit would have to be, well, basically 100% compliant with the provisions of zoning bylaw 8463 as it reads on the effective date of this bylaw.
Right.
That all information has been provided for the zoning review to be undertaken. Mr. Tudor can provide clarification if requested, and that all planning approvals have been obtained. So if somebody comes in with a building permit and an application and everything is sorted out, but they require a minor variance, that further planning approval is still required and the transition clause would not apply.
Okay, so what happens if they've done all that and they've applied, they've got their variance through committee of adjustments, and they've got their building permit, and they've applied for a site plan application, but because of the backlog, that hasn't been heard yet. So now are they prejudiced? Do they not fall under the old bylaw?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Khan, our intent, the staff intent is provided in section 1.8.2D, where a minor variance was required in order to give effect to a site plan approval, and I can think of one application for sure that is in this scenario. The transition clause would apply in that context. If it is a subsequent planning approval that is required, that doesn't fit into one of these four pigeonholes here, then compliance with the new zoning bylaw, which implements the livable Oakville plan, would be required.
Just to be clear, so if there is an application made for a site plan application made, but it hasn't been heard, okay, then are you suggesting that the old bylaw will not apply?
Through Your Worship, one moment. Through Your Worship to Councillor Khan, if we have an active application in process where a decision has not yet been made, and actually this is more than a site plan question, applications that are in process that involve the zoning bylaw are required to comply with the bylaws in force. Once this bylaw is passed by council tonight, another night, there would be two bylaws in force, and compliance needs to be achieved with both. If a proposal does not comply with one or both bylaws, relief may be required. And as one additional editorial note, I know that there are a number of people who have submitted correspondence because there's a provision in here that causes concern. There is a smaller number, but there is a number of development applications today that do not comply with 8463 that would comply with this. So the relief there is relief and issues sort of both ways.
Okay, treat me like I'm dumb, which most people do. Just yes or no. If there is a site plan application in the works and everything else is met, will the new bylaw apply or the old bylaw? Just say old or new. That's all I want to hear.
Assuming we are speaking that no decision has been made yet?
Yes.
New bylaw.
Okay, so that's where I have a concern, because in in 18.1A, it says a building permit has to be filed, not approved. Okay? But in C, you need approval. Why can't we have consistency and say they're filed for both reasons, for both terms? If something is in the works and they're backlogged, why is the applicant prejudiced?
Through your worship to Councillor Khan. There's two main reasons why staff are making the recommendation that we are making with respect to applications and process. The first one, which is, I believe, heavily covered within the staff reports themselves, are that we have a zoning framework today that in many locations and circumstances does not conform to the Livable Oakville plan. What isn't well elucidated within the reports themselves, there is no timeline per se for staff, the corporation, to process a development application other than OMB appeal periods. We have a competing ask between recognizing applications that are in process and bringing zoning into conformity with a new official plan within the 3-year timeline that is mandated by the Planning Act. Staff are coming forward with the recommendation that compliance with the new bylaw is important. When it comes to transitions, it's more of a policy question where this comes into play, and current applications and process are recognized. Zoning doesn't necessarily have that. The regulation as it's contained within today goes beyond what the Planning Act requires us to do. I should also point out, as much as this is a very emergent area, a number of municipalities have approved zoning bylaws as of in the last, I'll say, 6 to 7 years without transition clauses, and recognizing applications in process, and have relatively survived.
I want to end by saying that although I seem argumentative, I think our staff has done a great job on this. I really do. But it is my duty, if I believe there are some areas of concerns, to point them out. And if there's areas that I don't agree with, what I believe are prejudiced residents or unfair to the residents or developers for that matter, I think a fair process is required. And you're right that some amendments or bylaws in other municipalities have absolutely no transition periods. And then there's also others that have what I'm seeking, is that where the application has been filed. And so there's both sides, but I think that we should be open to making sure that we're consistent in our wording. On the one hand, you say filed, on the other hand, it has to be approved. And I think we also have to be cognizant of the prejudice that we're doing to our residents.
Your worship, I'll defer to Ms. Anderson.
Ms. Anderson.
Sorry, not to belabor this point, but just through your worship to Councillor Khan, I just want to make a distinction between the rationale for filing with a building permit as opposed to the application for site plan. Not all building permits require site plan, but many do. And the process for filing a building permit is under a time frame under the Ontario Building Code, whereas the site plan provisions are not. And I would suggest that the best fairness for the town of Oakville and its residents is certainty.
I have questions from Councillor Knoll, but before I go to Councillor Knoll, I'd like to ask 3 information questions. I've heard an answer in here, but I'm not sure it's clear, so I'm asking in order to sort of put it in the spotlight. And I guess I'll ask it rhetorically. Is it true that there is no backlog technically in site plan?
I'd best defer to Ms. Anderson. I have no idea.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Next, is it correct that appeal rights depend upon having submitted in writing, or is it sufficient to have participated verbally as well?
I'd best defer to Ms. Weiss.
Mr. Chair, the act requires either written submissions to council or oral submissions at a public hearing.
Thank you. And then finally, in the back and forth, I believe I have heard, that there was not any message given that barred submissions after noon today. Rather, I heard that people were advised that if they wanted their submission in the noon package, they had to get it in before noon. And they were clearly advised that they could continue to bring and that submissions would still be taken, but they had to bring them to this meeting. Have I understood this correctly?
With one addition, Your Worship, they could call our clerk's department to try and make additional arrangements, but yes.
Even better. All right, I'm satisfied with those points. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you. This should be a quick question. Specifically with respect to your flow chart as it pertained to the appeal processes after approval by council. I understand. Would you mind going back to that for a second? Thanks. So I just want to be clear here. Is this all or nothing kind of arrangement? So if there is, and there probably will be, I agree with you, there probably likely be appeals. If there is an appeal that is site-specific or, relatively minor, does it throw the entire bylaw into abeyance, or does it do we apply the other sections that are not under appeal?
Through Your Worship, I'll defer to Ms. Weiss with one quick counterpoint. In the 10 previous comprehensive zoning bylaws I've seen through to completion, 9 were appealed.
Yeah.
Through Your Worship, the way that the section of the Act works is that if there's one appeal, even if it's site-specific, the whole bylaw is in limbo. But there are provisions under the Act to bring the unappealed portions into effect on a motion to the board.
So what happens in the case where, let's just paint a scenario for a second. We approve it tonight, and tomorrow by 4 o'clock there's 5 or 6 appeals with the board, so it's in abeyance essentially. What happens to applications that have to be adjudicated between now and then if the intent is to make the bylaw retroactive? It's sort of a chicken and egg question, I know, but.
Yes, as an odd quirk of the Act, applications at that point, particularly for building permits, because there is uncertainty over whether the new bylaw will ever come into effect, given its retroactive nature, the chief building official has to assure themselves that both bylaws are met during that period, even though one will eventually take precedence over the other. So that's why there is an interest in bringing the bylaw into effect as soon as possible.
So poor Mr. Tudor has to take both pages and make sure they apply with both? Wow, that could be complicated. Good luck.
Councillor, you will recall that in many cases, we've had appeals where on day one, we bring a motion to have the unappealed portions ordered into effect, and that's always happened. All right, Council, other questions?
Would that would be the intent, I guess.
Yeah.
Would that, so if that were the case, would we immediately, without any waiting, go and make that necessary motion to the board so that we are able to deal with that proactively?
I can advise that would likely be high on the priority list, but there would be a legal memorandum coming forward to council advising as to the nature of the appeals and recommended next steps.
Okay, thank you so much.
Legal never sleeps. Any other questions by council? Madam Clerk, would you call the first delegation?
The first delegation is Mr. David Capper, here speaking to item 2 from Weston Consulting, representing a number of clients.
Welcome, Mr. Capper. You're familiar with our procedures. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much. Just as a matter of housekeeping, an extremely relevant one at this point in time, I'm unfortunately one of those individuals who was tardy in submitting responses to Mr. Nethery. I did have one that made it before the deadline this afternoon and one that made it after. In an abundance of caution, I've got 20 copies of each of those correspondence for distribution to council this evening. I'll leave those there. And through you, Your Worship, we have submitted written correspondence on behalf of 16 clients. I'm here before you this evening to read into the record the addresses and the clients relevant to those submissions. Bear with me, I'll be very quick. The address of 580 Burlock Drive, and the owner of the property is Hans Holdings, Inc. Address 420 and 483 South Service Road East, with the owner GE Lighting Canada. 400 Iroquois Shore Road, with the owner Wellspring Pharmaceutical. 2070 Wycroft Road, with the owner or property manager Strategic Property Management. 406 to 420 North Service Road East, with the owner or property manager Strategic Property Management. 601 to 609 Ford Drive, again, the property manager or owner Strategic Property Management. 900 to 916 Winston Churchill Boulevard and 2493 Barrel Road, which is one registered parcel. Strategic Property Management, Inc., owners or property managers. 1097 North Service Road East. Strategic Property Management, Inc. 2245 Wycroft Road, Strategic Property Management, Inc. 67 Lakeshore Road West, Mr. A. Carnavale. 2842 Lakeshore Road West and 8894 Chisholm Street, 88 to 94 Chisholm Street. Green Life West Harbor, 156 to 160 Trafalgar Road, and the owner is Trafalgar Oaks Developments. 1405 to 1465 North Service Road East, Carterra Private Equities, Inc. 1375 to 1405 North Service Road East, Carterra Private Equities, Inc. 360 Oakville Place Drive, Hood Development, Inc., and 1132 Invicta Drive, and that is the numbered company 1799116 Ontario Limited. Through you, Your Worship, we've provided written correspondence for all of these property owners. They are now part of your record, and I would be happy to answer any questions that council has with respect to these properties.
Thank you very much for your information.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Next delegation is Ravia Jokyo, representing a number of clients. Here speaking to item 1 and 2.
Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I too am here to read into the record a few more property owners. I represent the Oakville Club, 56 Water Street.
Before you do,
Yes.
have you submitted these in writing also?
There have been some, but there are additional.
You only need to name any you haven't submitted in writing. You don't have to follow Mr. Capper's example.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
I will read into the record then the numbered company 2160556 Ontario Inc., 133 to 139 Kerr Street. I do have additional comments from several of my clients that wanted me to advise council that they felt that the notification provided from staff was not sufficient. Several of them actually found out about the implications of the zoning bylaw quite late in the process through neighbors that had come to know through other property owners. And so many of my clients felt that it was not sufficient. And they wanted me to point that out to council today.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Next delegation is Christopher Williams, here speaking to item 1 and 2.
Mr. Williams, welcome. Council looks forward to your information. It looks like you have a lot.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. First of all, I'm here representing two clients, Ballantree Homes and Silwell Developments, Inc. We've submitted two comprehensive submissions. One was well within time, but one, I'm sorry to say, was somewhat after the noon deadline, although it hopefully is with your material. Now, I'd like to, with the assistance of someone, hand out this material. The Silwell letter is first, and that, as you can see, has been in the town's possession for some days. And to make your life a bit easier, there's a bit of a crib sheet that goes with the Stilwell letter that'll just tell you what it is that we're looking for. Now that timer's rather ominous there.
Well, you know, in basketball, they give you 3 minutes to make a decision and shoot the ball.
Okay,
So
well-
this is our way of helping you get to your point before the
Right,
time
I'll
runs out.
See if I can lob this other submission up too. And while I'm waiting to do that, since I'm now down to about 8.5 minutes, I just should indicate that I'm a partner with the law firm of Aird & Burles LLP. And with respect to Stilwell, we acted for them during the formulation and hearings with respect to livable Oakville, and were a part of the various settlements. The letter that you've been handed really sets out two classes of concerns. The first one are concerns of a technical nature, and they're set out on page 2. I won't take you through them because I believe that staff are agreeable to the changes, and if I'm wrong, you can go back to the letter. The other changes are a little more substantive, and right now I'm still on Stilwell. If you can see the map there, and the map is also attached to the letter, Stilwell owns properties that are zoned MU 241, MU 437, and MU 438. Now, the properties in the uptown core, 209 and 231 Oak Park Boulevard, building permits have been issued. In fact, buildings have been constructed, and in one case, almost fully occupied. Those buildings are office buildings, and at the time of their building permit issuance and construction, there were no limitations on ground floor uses in the bylaw that existed at the time of the building permit application. However, the proposed zoning bylaw contains quite a significant limitation in that it limits the office uses to only 50% of the ground floor. And that is contrary to the approved site plan, to the building permit, and to what's currently there. The transitional provisions would not apply because a building permit has been issued. And it's our submission that there should be an exception for these properties so that a legal non-conforming use is not created. A legal non-conforming use may be something that lawyers and planners like, but certainly property owners and councils don't, because it creates a lot of confusion, opportunities for litigation, and uncertainty. So what we suggest is that the bylaw be modified to recognize the zoning that was in place when the building permits were issued and the buildings were constructed. Just going through the Stilwell submission, and I'm on page 3, there's another property in the block bounded by Oak Walk Drive, Millwood Drive, Dundas Street East, and Oak Park Boulevard. In that case, there hasn't been a building that's been developed. However, it's our client's position that as an office, a standalone office building is permitted on that particular designation and zone, that again, the imposition of this restriction, it's called footnote number 6, and you may have heard of that one before, should not apply. On our read of livable Oakville, in the way that it was settled, it's our understanding that restrictions on main floor street frontages, and the implication is that you want to create a kind of main street, animated street frontage with stores and restaurants and service shops, is to be negotiated at the time of development approval. And that was always our understanding on how that provision was going to work. Now what we find with the zoning bylaw, with this footnote 6, which I might add came in very late in the day after the public meeting, is a rather heavy-handed, arbitrary restriction on how you can use that particular part of your property. And so we would ask again that the restriction in footnote 6 not apply, and as in our submission it was intended to work, that what and how much and where the ground floor retail and service is going to be is negotiated at the time of site plan approval, rather than, as I say, what appears to be a rather arbitrary, heavy-handed approach contrary to our understanding of livable Oakville. And finally, with respect to Silwell, there's the Hayes Boulevard and Oak Walk Drive. In that particular situation, it's a little different. We had agreed in our settlement of livable Oakville to maximum parking standards. We understand that staff in this bylaw is not applying maximum parking standards except to people like us that agreed to them earlier on, and all we're simply asking for is consideration be given to consistency. That if there's not going to be maximum parking standards for others, then we think it's a little fair if they're not for us. Now, with respect to Ballantree Homes, some of the same concerns apply. Now, we didn't act for Ballantree during the formulation of livable Oakville, but I believe that much of their property was actually acquired from Silwell, so we're probably involved in those properties. With respect to 216 Oak Park Boulevard, similar situation to Silwell. A site plan pursuant to Section 40 of the Planning Act has been negotiated and is in conditional approval. The bylaw doesn't restrict the office uses nor residential in that case, ancillary residential along the frontage. The site plan was negotiated in accordance with that zoning bylaw, but the proposed zoning bylaw imposes the footnote 6 restriction, and a restriction on the amount of residential that is contrary to the existing zoning. And again, we are asking that there be a specific exemption with respect to that because those uses were negotiated at the site plan approval stage. With respect to the Taunton Road property, similar to above, the site plan has been negotiated, conditionally approved, and in fact a building permit application in accordance with that site plan has been submitted. The current zoning permits multiple attached dwellings and masonette dwelling units. Proposed zoning permits townhouses, but it doesn't say anything about stacked townhouses. Now, we heard a bit about that in the staff submission. I'm not sure how to interpret that, but taking out stacked townhouses causes us considerable concern that the uses have been removed or there may be confusion at the time of the issuance of a building permit. And as the site plan shows, our client always wanted stacked townhouses and had approached its development concept with stacked townhouses. We go to another area, which is Palermo Village, and again, we're south of the area that was outlined by staff that was of particular concern. Again, in this particular situation, we have the issue with the stacked townhouses. We have approval in livable Oakville, where it includes stacked townhouses. We have a staff recommendation to remove stacked townhouses, replace them with another concept, and we have serious concerns that one of the uses, and a use that we understood was going to go through there with livable Oakville, is going to be removed. So we'd like to see stacked townhouses come back in, and that the implementing zoning bylaw also reflect the stacked townhouses. And I see I'm into overtime here. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
There's questions for you, Mr. Williams. I believe. Councillor Elgar?
Yeah, thank you for coming tonight and highlighting some of the issues. I'm interested in the one you referred to with regard to Hayes Boulevard and Oak Walk Drive. And and I just want to understand what you were saying. And are you telling us that we, as the town, should not be bound by the decision of the OMB that was signed off?
All we're suggesting there is that consideration be given to making the planning consistent. If other people don't have a maximum parking standard, we'd like to be treated in the same way. I can say that, certainly if push comes to shove, we did sign the minutes of settlement and will abide by that. But as a matter of good planning and fairness, we do have some concern that there is now a restriction that applies to us that may not be applying to other people. But certainly we live with what we had agreed to. I just wanted to point that out, that it's an area of some concern for us, that there seem to be now some different standards that we hadn't anticipated.
Okay, I was interested in that because I thought you were saying even if we have OMB decisions, we as a town don't have to abide by them.
Well, you can always change the planning on something, and I have dealt with minutes of settlement before, and what really seems to govern is good planning, but we certainly abide by what we agreed to, but we're concerned that there is now a bit of a disconnect with what's going on with others. And I'll take it no further than that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others? Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Paul and Penny Cates, both Bronte property owners, and here to speak to item 1 and 2. Perhaps. Just to listen, I think.
Beg your pardon?
He's just here to listen.
Thank you very much, sir. The next delegation.
The next delegation is John Vale, here from Real Estate Strategies, speaking to both items 1 and 2.
Welcome, Mr. Vale, and we're eager to hear your strategies.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Worship, and it's always nice to hear the sound of my own voice. With respect to Councillor Khan's comments, treat me like I'm dumb. I like that. I hope it's not trademark. I'm going to use that on a regular basis from now on. I have a couple of questions of the writers of the report and the recommenders. First of all, on the official plan amendment. The official plan amendment was, as I understand it, originally done to recognize existing uses around the town that were maybe not captured in the original livable Oakville plan. And I wonder if I could just ask the question whether all of the automotive uses were captured in the official plan amendment, or are there still areas of the town where automotive uses that currently exist would not be permitted? That would be my first question to the staff. Then going on to the zoning bylaw, what concerns that I have are, quite frankly, concerns I had at the last public meeting, that in fact it's an all-out assault on small business here in town. Let me paint a picture for you of what's going on. In the materials that were presented for the purpose of this meeting, the business and commercial uses were outlined in a chart form, which I appreciate, that were either the transition from the old to the new. So in the process, and it's the town's own document, not mine, I counted between the commercial and the business uses 54 items, 54 use permissions that were no longer permitted but may exist around the town. And So my second question to staff was, the idea of do not permit strikes me as flying in the face of livable Oakville, which states in its literature and in its definitions that the town, it is a key policy of this plan to maximize the opportunity for residents to work in Oakville, to maintain a healthy tax base, and to achieve the goal of a balanced and complete community. So I really don't understand how the town can interpret livable Oakville, which is supposed to be live, work, play, to, instead of red carpet, not red tape, it is now, unfortunately, red carpet wrapped up in red tape. So if we could just get through some of these questions and understand it better, so that I can explain it better to the business community that in fact we're doing the right thing, that would be greatly appreciated, because in my opinion, my not so humble opinion of course, as usual, we are not conforming to livable Oakville in terms of interpreting the livable Oakville plan and putting it to where the rubber meets the road in the zoning. Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Vail. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Next delegation is Dr. Murray Hazard.
Dr. Murray Hazard, welcome. I haven't seen you in years. Welcome back. Glad to see you. Look forward to your information.
Mayor, Council, nice to meet you. Nice to see you again. I was going to say a lot of things that John Vail just covered. Many of you that I have been here before, I've been a longtime resident. I was born in Oakville. I've had an office in Bronte for the last 28 years, and I frequently appear before the council. So those of you that have been on previous councils have seen me before. I was very concerned when I read the proposals that it was an assault on the small businesses. I was concerned, as John Vail has just indicated. In my particular case in Bronte, my property height regulations have gone up and down over the past 2 or 3 decades. I first bought the property, it was a C3R property, so I could go with 3 stories, and maybe 1 more story if you asked really nicely, with bonusing. Then my property was part of the Moldenhauer application a few years ago that he asked for 8 stories. He was then approved for 6 stories, and then he ran out of money. And now, this present location, my property is now a 2-story. So one of the things that a long-term investment in Bronte, in Oakville, needs is continuity. It needs predictability. You need to get mortgages on a long-term investment basis. And to have this sort of up and down is extremely frustrating. And I just wanted to ask for guidance on how to go from here. I appreciate that there's been a tremendous amount of work in this proposal. The 500 pages are very, very impressive. But it started on the wrong premise. It didn't ask the question, what would make Oakville more livable and how could we make our community better as the first premise? By coming from the top down like this, it's so frustrating for the businesses that are trying to stay in Bronte. I now phone before I go to a business in Bronte because so many are leaving Bronte. I noticed another one left this week. It's not an easy to have a business in Bronte. Many of the live works across the street from my clinic have gone out of business. I don't even get their phone numbers in my calendars before they've gone out of business. So the small businesses do need some consideration. And in this area, in the Bronte area, where the limit has been put to 2 stories, that does seem too low. Can I put that to council?
Thank you for your information. Dr. Hazard, were you here and able to receive the information given by staff earlier in the start?
Yes.
So I just want to ask you if you understood that the premise that the zoning bylaw must start from is how will it, it must apply the livable Oakville plan. It can't change the livable Oakville plan. And the livable Oakville plan set out as its business to make Oakville as livable as possible.
Absolutely.
So if there's a contradiction between our proposal and livability in your view, it's an amendment to the official plan that will be required, and there's a process about to begin, the given 5-year review, where your views would be most welcome.
Well, I'll be there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bill Whitaker, here speaking to item 2.
Mr. Whitaker, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Council, I have just a couple of very quick questions. I have a property at 86 Wilson Street, which is grandfathered as commercial and residential. I talked to some of the planning people earlier this morning, and they said that when this new bylaw comes in, that the residential would be taken off the table on my grandfathered property. Defer to planning, is that true?
Mr. Whitaker, the way we work here is
Okay,
I'm the chair, and
all right.
I'll get you your answer in due course, and I've written down your question.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
The other question would be if, to go to the appeal process, if this isn't kept the same, where do I get the papers for that?
We'll explain that too.
All right.
Thank you very much for your questions.
Next delegation is Martin Mudrick, here to speak to item 2.
Welcome, Mr. Mudrick.
Thank you, Councillor.
Now, Mr. Mudrick, if you are at all soft-spoken, would you do me the favor of pulling the microphone over towards you so that you're speaking into it?
Of course, it's probably because I'm more nervous than anything else.
No problem.
Okay, I live at 2052 Upper Middle Road on the map here. It's approximately in the middle. The zoning changes in this area are going to restrict building in this area now. Myself and residents in the area, we've been working as individuals, working as groups, trying to get this area developed, trying to sell our properties. It is zoned commercial. We've met a number of roadblocks. One of the major stumbling blocks of servicing this area is just coming to fruition now. They've been started to put the sewers into this area to service this area. And now all of a sudden, the town is changing the zoning of this area and putting restrictions on us, which is going to severely limit the development in this area and the sale of our properties. Another major concern that I have of this holding provision that they have on here, it basically says that you can't erect anything on these properties, which basically means that if my house unfortunately burns down, I can't even rebuild my house until all these conditions on here are met. And I have serious concerns about that, basically of being homeless at some point in the event of a catastrophe. So those are my major concerns of this area, that we're severely limited all of a sudden to development of our area.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, next delegation.
Next delegation is Calvin Lance, here speaking to the new zoning bylaw, item 2.
Mr. Lance, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Great. Thank you, Your Worship, and members of Council. My name's Calvin Lance. I'm a municipal lawyer at Stikeman Elliott in Toronto. I am here this evening to speak essentially to the transitional provisions that have been placed in the draft bylaw that's before you. We're pleased that the transitional provisions have been expanded. in large part to respond to concerns that have been raised with the second version of the bylaw. But in reading the recent draft of the bylaw, it seems to me that there's still a gap, and there's still a need for a little bit of work, a little bit of tweaking to the language that would bring some fairness to the applicants that are before this town. I've submitted three letters, one on behalf of a partner of mine at Stikeman Elliott, who's in the process of building a house in Oakville. The address is at 28 Lambert Common. That was submitted today. It should be in your records. I have also submitted a letter of concern on behalf of a client of mine known as Prince Bay Luxury Homes. They have a similar concern about the transitional provisions. The third letter I submitted was written by myself with respect to my property in Oakville. I live in Oakville, and that's at 251 Woodland Drive. Now, specifically what I'd like to speak about is the need in the transitional provisions to recognize applications that have been filed for minor variance applications or applications filed for site plan approval. And I understand the way the provisions are worded currently. If you have secured site plan approval and you make a building permit application, then you're governed by the existing bylaw, which I'll call the old bylaw, and not the new one. The situation my partner has with respect to 28 Lambert is he has just gone to the Committee of Adjustment. He just negotiated with the neighbors and worked out arrangements with the neighbors. He had to have a deferral because of the opposition that he had from the neighbors. And he went to the Committee of Adjustment and he got an approval. But he needs site plan approval. He filed for a building permit application, and under the wording in the draft bylaw that's before this council, he is not entitled to rely upon his minor variance application. He has to go back and do it again. And that's really unfortunate because I don't think that was the intention here. That someone who's in fact secured a minor variance to the existing bylaw and has applied for a building permit, but as of today's date has not actually secured site plan approval. It's a couple weeks away. He's going to, a couple weeks away. He'll have to go back, reapply for a minor variance, get on the agenda, go through the notice period, and deal with the neighbors to get variances from the existing bylaw, the one that we're currently bound by, and the new one. So instead of having possibly 3 variances, he may have 6 variances or 12, and he'll have to explain that to his neighbors. So that's one situation. The other situation with respect to Prince Bay Homes is they applied for site plan approval at the request of council. Or sorry, not council, I'm sorry, but of staff. They had a preliminary meeting with staff. Staff recommended that they do not go for minor variances, but rather go through the site plan approval process, determine what variances are needed, and then apply for their variances. As they stand today, they have an application that's been processed for the last 6 months, possibly more, and now, again, they're in this situation where they have a complete application, and they're going to have to be dealing with both the existing bylaw and the draft bylaw once it's approved, so 2 bylaws. There was a reference made to Milton passing their bylaw last night. What's very interesting is when I heard that, I flipped a note to my office and I just asked them to check the transitional provisions. They've confirmed that Milton acknowledges complete applications. So the very bylaw that staff were referring to tonight, in fact, recognizes complete applications, and such applications are grandfathered. And that's based on the Toronto bylaw. And in Toronto, they grandfather complete applications. And the Toronto bylaw is based on the Ottawa bylaw, and it acknowledges complete applications. And having talked to staff, and having been here at the last meeting, and having heard the comments tonight, I still have yet to hear a sound reason why Oakville has decided to do something different. and not grandfather complete applications for minor variances and site plan approval. So I think it would be very useful. It would help individual residents in Oakville with current applications if the work that they've been doing, the time they've been spending, and the money they've been spending on these applications are in fact recognized, and that we don't create additional hurdles that'll be problematic for them to move forward. I think it's definitely in the interest of this town to include that in the transitional provisions. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission. Your ward councillor may wish to speak to you.
I'm not his ward councillor.
Oh, I thought he was.
Nope. He decided to move out.
A councillor would like to
There
ask
you
you a
go.
question.
You mentioned about Prince Bay in 6 months. I didn't catch that. Can you explain what the 6-month delay is for?
They had put an application in with respect to their property at 74 Trafalgar Road. There was an application for site plan approval, and there would have been a preliminary meeting early on in that process. And my understanding from speaking to my client is that they were advised to start first with the site plan approval circulation to see what comments come back, which is not unusual. I am not suggesting at all that that's unusual. But it's interesting to see that going through a site plan application while concurrently there's a new zoning bylaw coming down the tube creates the situation we're in. And this would not be a situation if the transitional provisions recognize complete applications for site plan.
So the site plan approval has not been granted yet, despite the 6 months.
Yes.
All right, and this is one of the concerns I had raised earlier about the backlog, and our staff had indicated there is no backlog, but there is a delay in processing these applications.
That's correct. There's often it's an iterative process. There's a dialogue back and forth, and I don't think anyone's suggesting that staff is being slow in processing. It's just that it takes time, and the difficulty here is we're caught in a situation where the rules of the game are changing midway through the game. And I think everyone recognizes that that's fundamentally unfair. And the other thing is it doesn't need to be that way. And other municipalities have recognized it doesn't need to be that way. In Halton Region, Milton has recognized it. And as I said, Toronto and Ottawa.
Thank you for your submissions. The next delegation, please.
The next delegation is Rick Mattelson, here representing 1383081 Ontario Inc., speaking to item 2.
Mr. Mettleton, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. We look forward to your information.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship and members of Council. I'm one of the individuals who attempted to send an email this afternoon and got the message that in fact the ability to make submissions by email had been cut off. So I'm before you this morning with the 20 copies, and to say that I represent 1383081 Ontario Incorporated, and Mr. Yahia Ayatollahi, who's the owner of the property at 334 Lakeshore Road East in Oakville. He's my client, and I understand that the revisions to the zoning bylaw may negatively impact his property. I'm before you this evening to make representation that he does not believe the regulations that are being imposed upon him are necessary, and he would like to express that he's not in support of them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
And I will leave these copies here for your...
Please, yes.
For your information.
There are no further delegations listed at this time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any other members of the public with information for council on this matter? Yes, sir. Would you join us at the podium? Please identify yourself for the record and share your information.
Good evening. My name is Adrian Latavsky. I'm with the planning firm Johnston Latavsky, and I'm here representing the owners of 4 shopping plazas, namely FCHT Holdings Ontario Corp., who own and operate the shopping centers at 271 to 361 Cornwall Road, that's otherwise known as the old Oakville Marketplace, and 146 to 150 Lakeshore Road West. I'm also here on behalf of First Capital, Dundas, and Prince Michael Corporation, who own and operate the shops on Dundas Shopping Center at 2501 to 2525 Prince Michael Drive. And I'm also here on behalf of S. Riet Oakville Limited, who own and operate the shopping center at 511 Maple Grove Drive, also known as Maple Grove Village. Together, they can be collectively referred to as First Capital. And like other presenters here tonight, I had made a written submission, send it in. Unfortunately, I apologize, it was after the noon deadline, and so out of an abundance of caution, I have brought 20 copies of the submission and have it here for your information.
Thank you. The clerk will be glad to distribute those.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Anyone else? Thank you very much, everyone. I will confine it to table, and we have any number of questions lodged with us, and I'll looking around for a counselor who wants to start. Councillor Khan, do you have anything? I'll turn to staff. Were there any questions that you felt you needed to prioritize the answer to, or anything that you could clear up? Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Elgar is a late riser here.
No, I actually was going to say, Mayor Burton, you were saying you were writing down the questions. I thought we would just roll through the questions that you had written down so staff could answer them.
That's what I'm doing.
Right. That's why I didn't interrupt.
Thank you so much. Ms. Anderson. Councillor Elgar, I'm not the only one who writes things down around here.
Your Worship, sorry, I can't remember the trademark statement about not being that bright, but I don't think I wrote them all down. So please fill the ones in that I may have missed. So I might go backwards. Just in terms of a clarification on the issue of transition that I believe Mr. Lance raised. The section in transition 1.82D would apply specifically to 28 Lambert Common. They received variances on which conditions were. Sure.
I would like a little more volume on your microphone, and I don't think it's you or the angle of your mic, and I'm hoping that the boys in back are hearing me and can do something for me. So please start again.
With respect to the submission of Mr. Lance with respect to 28 Lambert Common, I would confirm to Council that Section 1.82D of the transition language addresses the issue of which addresses the concern that he raised, and that is that 28 Lambert Common did receive approved variances from the Committee of Adjustment, one of which had a condition that required site plan approval. And as such, Section 1.8D allows for that particular approval to be caught with the transition language so that it does comply under the old bylaw. So I would suggest that that language does exactly what the concern that was raised, it's in place and has effect for that particular application and others whereby prior to the May date and the effective date of this bylaw, if a variance was worded as such that it required that application to proceed through site plan approval, it would be under the old bylaw. I would also indicate that where Mr. Lance indicated that staff advised for Prince Bay Homes to proceed through site plan, as he indicated, that is a common practice so that more than the initial variances are sought, and based on the site plan review, it's often the case that those applications may be revised through several submissions and additional variances required to meet certain design criteria. As a result of that process, and actually by suggesting that that application be made after the date of this, those applications can then be made to any variances to both bylaws. And you will note that in our regulations, in our recommendation this evening, we do have a provision that with respect to waiving of fees for fairness so that there is only one application fee for those types of applications. So that's really a question of providing fairness as we go forward. With respect to the questions, I believe it was from Mr. Whitaker with respect to 86 Wilson Street. I believe Mr. Nethery can confirm that residential uses are and continue to be permitted on that property. Okay. I believe Mr. Vale asked a number of questions. One was, are all of the automotive uses continue to be permitted? And I would suggest to you that the approved livable Oakville plan does provide for exceptions for particular areas for some forms of automotive uses. There are others that would not be permitted, and this bylaw implements the approved livable Oakville plan. I would also indicate where it was stated that there are a number of uses that have been eliminated based on the chart comparison. That issue has come up before, and it's really a question of taking a number of detailed uses that are now consolidated into one definition of retail store, and similarly consolidating a number of uses that would be independently recognized as service commercial uses as service commercial uses. So where you see 10 going down to 1, they're all still permitted, they're just called service commercial. And I know there's some more, so I will look for your assistance.
Still in all, that's a very good start. Councillor Elgar?
There was one, I think it was Dr. Hazard, where we go from 3 stories to 8 stories to 6 stories and back to 2. Can staff comment on that?
Through your worship, I'd be happy to answer that question. The zoning permission for the mixed-use areas today in Bronte Village is a maximum of 2 stories and 8 meters, or 12.25 meters if you have a peaked roof. That's inclusive of mechanical equipment. The policy framework has changed over time. I'd speak to the full history of that, but I'd probably end up making a mistake. Generally speaking, Livable Oakville plan sets a minimum of 2 stories, a maximum of 4 stories. Corresponding metrics are included in the zoning bylaw, in the draft bylaw before you tonight, 7.5 to 15 meters. Some areas are lower than that, including a portion at the northeast corner of Sum Street and Lakeshore. St. Anne's Court is the cul-de-sac to the north that has a 2-story maximum. I'm the new guy here, so I'm not exactly sure if that's where Mr. Hazard's property was. It's not great. Other areas within Bronte Village actually have taller heights than that, minimums of 4, maximum of 6s, and a good chunk of the area has additional height available through bonusing and the provision of satisfactory community benefits. I would submit to council that the maximum heights that are permitted in Bronte Village in 8463 today will be going up as a part of the 2014 zone map.
Councillor, was I not going fast enough for you?
One other question I do have. Is there anything you heard tonight that we should change before we consider passing this bylaw from any of the people in the audience that spoke?
Through your worship to Councillor Elgar, with respect to all of the delegations that were made, I respect their opinions on the changes that are sought. However, I would suggest to you that it reinforces the current bylaw that's before you to go forward to provide certainty and to implement the Livable Oakville plan.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Councillor Khan?
I guess this question is for Ms. Anderson. Is that me? You had suggested with respect to I think it was a Prince Bay application, that if the variance required a site plan approval, then it would be caught under the old bylaw. At first, I thought you had to have full out approval, but now there is an exception. And I guess I'm having trouble understanding what the disadvantage would be to the town if we amended, and this is going back to what Councillor Elgar was saying, whether or not any changes are required, if we amended that all planning approvals have been obtained or completed applications have been filed. What's the detriment to the town?
Councillor Khan, I think again through your worship to Councillor Khan, it goes back to certainty. Unfortunately, while there are applications in progress that will be required to go through that additional step, we have other applications that have been filed that are not currently, I will say, active, but are that are either in process that would not provide for conformity. And it's a question of allowing those applications to continue to be out there for an unextended period of time without that certainty. And so I would still say that we need that certainty under this bylaw.
I agree with you on certainty, but I look at it from the other perspective. Someone has filed a site plan application under the old bylaw, and it's taken 6 months. There's no certainty on their part as well. And all of a sudden, in the midst of this, a new bylaw kicks in. I think they're disadvantaged by the lack of certainty.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Khan. I think it's best to answer this question specific to the scenario that's been presented to us tonight. And this is how I think certainty is best.
I just want to interrupt. This is more of a general question, not specific to, because I think there are going to be other individuals or other applicants.
So, Councillor, in that case, we debate with each other and not with staff. And we certainly are going to have a debate on this issue. And I will not support the suggested amendment that you're bringing forward. And I hope most of council are very concerned to get livable Oakville implemented in full as soon as possible. That particular address is in a very sensitive area of town, and it's one of the last places that I would want to wade through under the old bylaw. We've had a number of issues before this council in recent days that I don't think I have to remind you about, where we're seeing people frustrated because the promise of neighborhood protection under livable Oakville is being delayed or not delivered in the way that we wanted and said we would do. So for that reason, I'm fully in support of the staff recommendation, and I'm going to be urging every member of council to pass implementation as designed and extensively discussed. We've been working on this for 2 years and 9 months. I don't believe anybody gets to pretend that there's anything sudden here, and nobody gets to stand in front of us and convincingly say that they've been surprised in any way by what's going on.
That's great, but can I make my amendment first before before you make debate on it?
You can move it if you want, as soon as someone moves the main motion. And I guess we may as well look for a mover of the main motion. Councillor Knoll, thank you. We don't need a second. We're in committee of the whole. Councillor Khan, did you wish to move an amendment?
Yes, I do, Your Worship. And I think I vaguely understand where you stand on this position, but I'm going to stick to my amendment. And if it's struck down, it's struck down. But I think it is important, and I think it should be read into the record that 1.8.1C should be amended to include after approvals have been obtained or completed applications have been filed.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. The chair accepts your amendment, and it's now before council for debate. Commissioner, you can't give us debate, but you can give us information.
I'm not about to debate at all, but I did want to point out to you that there is no definition for what a complete application is, either under the site plan, requirements, or committee of adjustment. Building permits, there is a complete application definition, so you can define it and then reference it here. So there's no trigger to what is a complete application under the legislation.
I believe most of council caught that earlier this evening when we were discussing the matter, but in any event, Councillor Khan, would you like to change in any way the amendment?
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, because that is clarification. If something is before approval and a completed application is not defined, then it might very well be caught by that. And that was one of the questions that I asked when I said, dumb it down for me. So if something is, if a completed application is not defined and something is in the works and it might be considered, then my amendment is unnecessary.
Well, all right. Commissioner.
If I could clarify, the provisions of the transition are clear, that the only thing that is allowed to be recognized under the old bylaw are building permit applications that are filed and approvals that are granted under the Committee of Adjustment or through site plan approval. My clarification about the complete application is that if you were triggering the recognition of the new bylaw on a complete application. There is no definition for a complete application. So you could receive almost anything, and in fact, we have several site plan applications that could be many years old, and the issue is that they've never submitted the information sufficient enough to deal with the application. And so then you extend the time frame in which those things stay in abeyance, and the certainty of livable Oakville doesn't take place.
Councillor, is that you withdrawing your amendment? Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bird.
I don't want to debate it, but we've had this issue of when a application starts or grandfathering a number of times before. I think most recently, and we get it, is every time we adjust the development charges. What in the past have we used for the trigger on who should pay the old and the new development charges at a particular date, and who would be grandfathered through in the process? Do you remember? Was it a completed application or just slightly prior to building permit? I know you pay them at building permit, but I know we've had this question once an application is in the process, and then we've changed, unbeknownst to them, the development charges, which could be substantial. We get the argument, well, we should be grandfathered. And it strikes me that complete application has never been the trigger point. It has been something else, if we have done it.
I believe that the issuance or the decision on what the development charges are due is when the permit is issued. So it has nothing to do with when the application is filed. So when the permit is issued and the current bylaw that's in place, you know, we do indexing every year. That current bylaw is the bylaw that you judge your development charges on.
And during that process, do we not normally file something up there on the door? I noticed that as of, I think July 1st for some reason seems to be a magic day. As of July 1st, the new development charges will come into force and apply. Do we not notify the building industry that change?
We do. I believe it's April 1st is the date that usually triggers the indexing. And there's always a notice that goes up in the permit as well as on our website to indicate that change is taking place.
So in this application where we don't every 4 or 5 years, that's on an annual basis, or every 5 years the development charges changed. Was there any kind of communication that the town was working on a new zoning bylaw that would come into force at the end of the process? Like, as the mayor said, we've been at this for a couple of years. Meetings going through this. I'm sort of surprised that so many people thought that they were exempt because of the idea of a complete application would excuse them.
Through your worship to Councillor Bird, the notification through this in-zone process, as Mr. Nethery indicated, has been quite extensive. The transition provisions have been available online and distributed and open for discussion, and we have had those discussions and we've received input on it. In terms of development applications, anyone coming in for a pre-consultation or anyone with a development application in process, I would submit has had discussions with staff to indicate the transition with this particular bylaw, and accommodations have been made to identify where they need to comply with the new bylaw and the old bylaw if they're in process, and many of them are doing that. You'll probably see an application, for instance, coming forward, which actually completely conforms with the new bylaw, but has to come before you because of the time period when the old bylaw is still in place. It still needs a zoning amendment. So we have, through our pre-consultation and regular technical review, advised the majority, if not all the applicants of this issue.
Just a comment, I just reading the number of submissions we got here at the, I guess at the 11th hour, or late, all pretty well say the same thing, that this whole process, notwithstanding they appear to be people that have been involved in the land development or the property owners for a great number of years, seem to be a surprise to them. And they're asking me to defer it to allow them to digest what we have before us tonight. And so this whole issue of notification surprises me, notwithstanding we have, I guess, communication. We have groups called Build, and there seems to be a lot of dialogue about what we were doing and the number of public meetings and reaching out to the community, to ratepayer groups and associations and realtors and whatever it is. And then, so it surprised me that we're getting the number of letters here suggests I just learned about this like yesterday. And I don't know how do we address that, but there's got to be some sort of a better way. And then the other thing, when people are asking for changes, as I said before, trying to pick a starting point when we have a transitional period so everybody knows the rules, because I get concerned as like everybody else saying we're changing the rules in the middle of the game. Well, this game of trying to come up with a zoning bylaw to replace the one in 1984, it's a long period of time, and it's pretty thick. That's zoning bylaw reviews and changes and amendments to it and whatever it is. So updating it shouldn't be any surprise to people that have zoning on their property. So that's just my comment. So I'm opposed to trying to gerrymander it any further by suggesting that somehow an application, a completed application, whether it's active or inactive, somehow should be exempt.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Are there any other amendments? Is there any other debate? Shall I put the question? Councillor Knoll.
Can I just make a quick comment?
Certainly.
Thank you. Well, I moved the motion, so I just thought I'd take a moment to, first of all, thank the team for a fantastic job, and to explain to those watching that some of you may be used to the rigorous debate on this council, and the reality is that we've been dealing with this in committee for what's it, 2 years now? I think we've been meeting as 2.5 years. Yeah. So I mean, we've chewed on this biscuit for a while, and so I think most of us are ready to move on and get Livable Oakville fully implemented. So once again, thanks to the staff. And one thing I really like about this document is the ease of use. It's so user friendly, and I think this is such a great example of how I think governance and legislation should go forward to make it so simple for, lay people who simply, want to understand what their rights are on the property can look at diagrams and drawings and clear tables and concise, clear text, and I'm really, really impressed with that. So thank you for your great work, and look forward to the implementation.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor Elgar.
I was privileged enough to sit on the committee, and I'd just like to say thank you very much to the staff who worked tirelessly for hours and days and weeks and months. So I'm glad we're finally there, and just remember, everybody, it's all about the zoning, and we finally got it done.
That is the Councillor Elgar motto of the century. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to echo the sentiments of my colleagues around the table and those that did sit on the in-zone committee. Thank you very much to staff, in particular, Mr. Nethery, for you actually make zoning fun, which I never thought could be possible. But whether it was through your presentations or your response to the various unending inquiries, you were always willing to meet with whoever, respond to whoever. All we had to do is contact you. I know that in Ward 2, both Councillor DeMoff and myself reached out to our various residents associations, as well as the Kerr Village BIA, and you bent over backwards to accommodate them, along with Ms. Childs, to come out and speak with them, and it was very much appreciated by them. So I can't begin to say how much I appreciate your help.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Anyone else? Councillor Khan.
I too want to echo the sentiments that have been said before me. Despite the questions that I had raised earlier, I think you guys did a fantastic job, and I have been in the last few weeks been speaking to a lot of different stakeholders, and one thing they've always maintained is that how accessible our staff was in responding to their questions. So thank you very much, and a job well done.
Any others? And if I could be permitted a word. First, I want to issue a small clarification. Earlier, the in-zone committee was mentioned, and I think out of an abundance of caution, I'll mention that those were public meetings, as they're required to be, with full notice to the public given, agendas and a clerk. Those were legal public meetings, and I think that's an important thing to stress. To sum up, what I want to call everybody's attention to is that this is the 1182nd day of this council. And it feels to me like we have spent most of it reviewing and revising and responding to public consultation on the in-zone project. And I'm very pleased with the way all of that unfolded. I want to call your attention to I want to take you up to slightly a higher level now, and I want to take you back to the first day that I met our planning director, who came in knowing that this was one of the deliverables that she was going to have to deliver, was the official plan and the zoning bylaw. And she had been fully hired properly as our independent hiring policy dictates by our town manager, and I had actually no knowledge who was being hired, and Dana came to my office to introduce herself, and she asked me, she said, as a mayor, what do you expect of me? What do you hope from me? And this is what I said. I said, I hope that you will give us a planning department of which we can all be proud, which we can trust, and which will bring to our town glory, fame, and honor. Do you remember glory, fame, and honor? That's the way I raised my kids. Every night at the dinner table, I'd ask them, what have you done to bring glory, fame, and honor to the family name? And I think it's a useful question to guide your life as you go. And now, with the Livable Oakville plan and the in-zone project, certainly massive work has been done. But earlier tonight, when we were apprised of the way the new provincial policy statement, the PPS, has been changed to reflect the Oakville principle of local differentiation in planning, ladies and gentlemen, that's beyond glory, fame, and honor. That's influence and effect and results and change. And I want to thank you and everyone who works for you for that. You've really made a difference, all of you.
Did you just get teary-eyed? When did you become a softie?
This matter of how planning is conducted in our town has been a matter that has concerned the citizens of this town for longer than I've lived here, and I've lived here 20 years. And to get to this point, I think, is a major milestone. So I feel sentimental about it, that's true. I really would like to call the vote before.
Mayor Burton, you might want to also mention that it was this planning staff and basically this council that was the first municipality in Ontario to have a natural heritage system in their official plan. And effective Monday of this week, the new provincial policy statement also says it's mandatory for every municipality in Ontario to have a natural heritage system going forward. So again, we were #1 in the province.
I would give the credit for that to you, because ever since 2000, you've been the tiger in the tank of that movement. Now, I've been asked for a recorded vote, so to support the resolution by Councillor Knoll to pass discussion items 1 and 2, please rise to be named. Councillor Khan, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Bird, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Johnston, and Mayor Burton. They passed unanimously. Congratulations, one and all. We have no other items, and I would therefore look for a motion to rise and report. Councillor Lapworth, thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any. I rise and report that, where is my little, I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on discussion items 1 and 2 as noted by the clerk. We need a mover and seconder for the report. Councillor Johnston, Councillor Giddings, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Now, we need a mover and seconder for the bylaws. That's 2013 and 2014 as amended, 2014-30, and 41. Councillor Grant moves. Councillor Robinson seconds. All those in favor? Opposed? The bylaws are adopted. That completes our agenda. I want to thank you for your time and attention throughout this process. It has been terrific working with you, and we are adjourned.